Smile, Miguel.
I always smile. Is that Marv? My friend Marv?
You got it.
Welcome, Marv. I'm glad you made it. Christine, I think if you want to go ahead and kick us off, that'd be great.
Great, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Christine Saunders, and I'm the section director for the Inland Empire section of APA. And today we have a great panel for you for reviewing ethics. And so we will have CM credits available for today's meeting. I just need to get them uploaded. So we'll send that link out to you guys when it's available. And it will also qualify for our ethics CM credits. So if you guys could just introduce yourselves in the chat, everyone who's participating today, we'd like to just hear a little bit more about you and where you work, and if you want to share something that's of particular interest that you might be wanting to hear about today. We'll try to cover those as well at the end. And just to tell you a little bit about Inland Empire section of APA, if you're not already familiar, we are the planning organization for American Planning Association that is focused on Riverside and San Bernardino counties. We have 8 sections throughout the state. And so our conferences, our annual conferences for the state chapter rotate. And we were supposed to have our Riverside conference in 2020 at the outbreak of COVID. So that has been rescheduled for 2024. We'll be in Riverside. And so this fall in October, it'll be in Anaheim. So at least it'll be local to us in Anaheim as well. And next year it'll be in Fresno. So that's kind of the preview of the next 3 conferences is Anaheim, Fresno, and then back here in Riverside. So we'll definitely be looking to our membership to provide great content for programs, and also to attend and network with our colleagues. So I want to also acknowledge our team that has organized this panel for you. Robert, Leslie, and Miguel are the magic behind the screen and behind the scenes, getting everything organized for you. And they've done a great job putting together this panel. And I hope that everyone will have some great takeaways from it today. I also wanted to just give you a brief just information that, as we're listening through the lens of ethics right now, that you are, as an AICP member, bound by the APA Code of Ethics. And so if you haven't reviewed that lately, it would be a good opportunity to have a refresher. And there is also a process through APA to file any like complaints or inquiries about an issue that you might have if it has ethics implications. And so there is essentially a grievance process. I don't know if that's exactly what they call it, but there is a process to do that. And you can avail yourselves to that through the APA chapter website. And so every year, the national basically publishes case studies of the ethics cases that have gone through the process that year. So those are, a really great resource as you're navigating your career and your situations within your various cities or jurisdictions that you can avail yourselves to as a resource as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Leslie. She's going to be our Master of Ceremonies this afternoon and introduce our panel.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, and just want to give a few things for everyone to note. We are recording this session, so the beginning will be recorded and so will the end. There will be a breakout session a little bit into the hour, and we won't be recording that part, but just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that. And if you have any questions throughout the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll be monitoring it. So definitely can make sure that we don't miss any of those questions. So there will be opportunity to ask questions after every presentation, but thank you all for being here and coming, with open ears to listen to, our panelists that are here today to give us some really good information. And we really put together this workshop to pretty much highlight these like themes of leading ethically in the work that we do, especially as like in planning and in all the different work that we do in public service, and looking at righting the wrongs of the past and what that looks like, especially in Indigenous communities. And we're looking at Section 14 today. So definitely there is a lot more to discuss there, but we'll be looking very briefly about what that looks like and has looked like for the past few years and what that will look like moving forward. And in the moving forward section, and hopefully we can talk about this in the breakout sections is like, what does it mean to move forward, right? Do land acknowledgements, what that looks like in working together with tribal communities, Indigenous communities, and authentically engage people in the planning process, right? What that looks like. So the agenda for today really is going over the AICP Code of Ethics, the land acknowledgements from San Bernardino County Museum, navigating the wrongs of the past of Section 14, the breakout groups, and then we'll wrap up. So without further ado, I think we can go ahead and dive right into the AICP Code of Ethics by Miguel Vazquez. And for those of you who don't know the amazing Miguel, he is a health, equity, urban and regional planner at the Riverside County Health System in public health. His role really is to strengthen the integration of planning and health through collaboration with all partners. And Miguel, he's doing everything. So thank you, Miguel, and you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you some of the recent changes to the AICP Code of Ethics, because I know in the room, not everyone is a planner. You should know that the American Planning Association has an affiliate, which is the American Institute of Certified Planners, and planners who hold that credential, the AICP credential, are bounded by the Code of Ethics. In reality, all planners are bounded by AICP Code of Ethics, but if you have AICP and if you're found to not follow the AICP Code of Ethics, you are at risk of losing your credential. So for many of us who have this credential, it's really, really important to keep up with the changes and also applying the principles and rules of conduct that we planners have to follow. So today I'm going to give you just a very brief update on a major change that happened, but again, in the spirit of also sharing with the audience who may not necessarily know much about APA and the Code of Ethics and AICP, I'd like you to see first, why is it that we, what is it that planners do and what our responsibilities are. And mainly we are here as planners to serve the public interest, whether we're planners in the public sector or in the private sector. This is our mission, to serve the public interest. And to be able to do that effectively, we have these three purposes of the AICP Code of Ethics. Number one, which is to define the aspirational principles for all of those who participate in the planning process. Also to define the rules of practice and behavior to which all members of AICP are held accountable. And the third one is to define the procedures of enforcement of these rules. Today, I'm only going to focus on one of the aspirational principles, which is one of the newest additions to the AICP Code of Ethics. What I'm going to do also when I complete my presentation is to provide you with a link in the chat where anybody can have access to the full Code of Ethics, and then you can explore it beyond this presentation. So what you need to know in terms of the AICP Code of Ethics is that it was actually first adopted in 2005. There was a revision back in 2016. And the latest was completed just last year in November 2021. And I have been in different capacities being part of the revisions. One of the roles that I held as part of APA National was to chair the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for APA. And in our work plan, we aimed at revising the Code of Ethics to reflect the issues of the day. And I think the principle that I'm going to share with you reflects that. So here we go. This is one of the newest additions to the AICP Code of Ethics, which is Section 8, the principles to which we aspire. And I highlighted some of the most important keywords of this addition to the code. And I'm just going to read them very quickly, but hopefully as I read, you have an opportunity to begin to reflect on what is it that we planners need to do in our capacity. So here we go. People who participate in the planning process shall work to achieve economic, social, and racial equity. And that is done through creating plans that ensures equitable access to resources and opportunities that can result in the upward economic mobility, a sense of belonging, and also enhance quality of life. We also need to recognize our unique responsibility to eliminate historic patterns of inequity that are tied to planning decisions. We also shall seek social justice by identifying and working to expand choice and opportunity for all persons. We need to emphasize that work or special attention to or responsibility to plan with those who have been marginalized or disadvantaged, and to promote racial and economic equity. We need to urge the alteration of policies, institutions, and decisions that do not help meet their needs. We also need to recognize and work to mitigate the impacts of existing plans and procedures that results in patterns of discrimination, displacement, or environmental justice. We need to plan for anticipated public and private sector investment in historically low-income neighborhoods. We need to promote an increase in the supply and quality of affordable housing. Lastly, which is the topic that today we will be exploring to some extent, which will help us to discern what this means. We need to promote the inherent rights of Indigenous people and work with Indigenous peoples on developments affecting them in their lands and resources. And many of the planners in the room, I suspect that they are already engaged with our local tribes in many different ways to address this important aspect of this principle. And to help us understand what this means and how to begin, our next presenters will be able to share actual tangible interventions that they have been working on. Some of this information is sensitive and some of this information is also hard to discuss, but being in this space and taking the courage to start the conversation is an important step towards fulfilling our mission. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Leslie, and then she'll take it from there. So thank you, Leslie.
Awesome. Sorry, my laptop was not have battery. So I was connecting it, but thank you, Miguel, for that. I think now we can go ahead and move with Melissa on her presentation. And for those of you who don't know Melissa, Melissa's the director of the San Bernardino County Museum. She has over 30 years of experience in nonprofit executive management and board of trustee positions and several years in the private sector, which is probably no secret why her leadership is key to the success of the museum and the work they've been doing around land acknowledgements. So thank you, Melissa, for being here, and go ahead and let us hear the presentation.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Perfect. So first of all, I want to thank the organization and thank Miguel, especially for inviting me to speak to this group. Your introduction and the segue is perfect because it gives me an idea of where your organization is on equity issues. So I appreciate that. It gives me some sense as I give this presentation. So at the beginning of this presentation or a presentation, normally I would state our land acknowledgement as part of my presentation, but because the presentation is about that, and I'm going to be talking about how we got there, I'll be stating that later in the presentation. I also want to just say at the outset that I am speaking on behalf of the museum and our role in developing this land acknowledgement. I certainly do not speak for our tribal partners. However, I did let them know as a courtesy that I'd be giving this presentation because I think, as you'll see through this presentation, communication with our partners is really key, and sort of a shared work. So with that, let me start out first. I just wanted to share the museum's mission, which we updated in 2016, not too long ago, just to emphasize the museum's focus on public engagement and impact. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but really we moved from a very collections focused, academic focus to public engagement and impact on our communities. Oops. Next. Also, I'm sure as planners, I think you're probably all aware of third spaces. We do see ourselves, the museum, as a third space in the community. In other words, we're a convener. We're certainly a convener in the with a goal of cultural competency in our community. So I just wanted to kind of show this to make sure that, again, there's an understanding of the role of the museum in the community, and which leads into why we would do a land acknowledgement. And of course, we welcome all ages, all backgrounds, and each year we welcome about 80,000 people through our doors. So I think we are in a position and have the opportunity to make a big impact in the region. Our methodology for developing our programs, exhibits, has really evolved to a shared authority type model or co-curatorship type model. So when we're developing exhibits on any culture, we always want to have participation of people in that culture. So certainly our Indigenous population, our tribal partners have been a part of developing our exhibits for a number of years now. And this is one of our exhibits, Sacred Earth. San Manuel Band of Mission Indians and their cultural resource management department was very involved in helping us develop that. So with that, I wanted to, we'll talk about land acknowledgements. So just the definition, land acknowledgements are brief statements. They are written in consultation and collaboration with tribal representatives. The statements are a value declaration that may align with organizational intentions in diversity, equity, access, and inclusion planning and practices. And again, it was great to hear kind of just a snapshot of your ethics policies and the culture of your organization. The museum field is very much aligned with that. and has really increased focus and hard work in diversity, equity, access, and inclusion for a number of years now. So the land acknowledgement statement is meant to be reparative, to reconcile and address the historical displacement of Indigenous peoples in your area, and to empower the current descendants of the Indigenous culture by recognizing their value and importance in history. This is very much an act by developing and proclaiming a land acknowledgement. We see it as an act of diplomacy and protocol. These acknowledgements are being spoken at the outset of meetings or events. They are being permanently affixed to walls, placed in a landscape, incorporated into an art piece or an email signature. But I do want to emphasize, especially, in our case, certainly in our case, the land acknowledgement for us was part of a trajectory. We had been working with the tribe, and we will continue to. And this was the piece that we felt it was important to do, but it's not the beginning or the end of a relationship with your tribal partners. It's really much more than that. So I just wanted to provide a quick map of the tribes, pre-contact tribal territories in California. There are 110 federally recognized tribes in California, and 55, I got that somewhere. I think there's actually more than that of California tribes seeking federal recognition. Some of those, there's California state laws that have updated some of that California recognizes more tribes. But anyway, I just wanted to get everyone an idea of the kind of ancestral lands that we're talking about in California. I'm just going to give you some examples of how organizations are presenting their land acknowledgements. Just give you a couple here. This is University of Waterloo, so it's just your basic plaque on the wall, bronze plaque, and that's perfectly fine. This is a little bit more artistic, a little bit more creative. Maybe it takes a little bit more maintenance if you're looking at those issues. But this is the Mennonite Church in Seattle. Has a land acknowledgement that looks like it was painted or muraled on their building. This is a landscape plaque at St. Mary's College of Maryland. So you kind of get an idea of what these look like. So I'm going to now read the San Bernardino County land acknowledgement. San Bernardino County Museum acknowledges that the land on which our facilities are sited is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mariam, commonly referred to as Serrano people, which in the contemporary era are represented by two federally recognized tribes, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians and Morongo Band of Mission Indians. We also acknowledge that in the historic era, other tribal communities and European settlers intersected with Serrano peoples in these spaces. Our histories and stories are intertwined in this space, and by sharing them in culturally appropriate ways and co-stewarding collections, we hope to honor and celebrate our Indigenous neighbors and partners. We also seek to offer an accurate, clear, and thorough picture of this region's complicated past and create a shared vision for the future that is mutually beneficial and respectful to all. So with that, what are the steps that we took that you can take to develop a land acknowledgement statement? So first of all, you need to self-reflect on why you're doing a land acknowledgement in the first place. So the questions you want to ask are why now? Why are you creating the acknowledgement at this time? Are you doing it to check a box? Or are you doing it because of the social justice issues that are around at this time? Is this your attempt to figure out how to move forward and have conversations with your local tribes? What is the relationship you have currently with the stewards, with the original stewards of the land? And what process of reconciliation or what to address the historic displacement of Native peoples. So really that self-reflection is about where is your organization now? Where are you now in relation to your tribal partners? Because you don't want to be just checking a box. You don't want, again, I mentioned earlier, you want this to be not just the beginning or the end. It's a continuum of really a relationship building with your local tribe. In terms of research, you really want to know the history of the land that you're referencing, or that you're, excuse me, that you're working with. You want to know who the Indigenous peoples were, who the contemporary tribes are. In our case, we're on Serrano land. That's the Indigenous historically, the historic ancestors. And our tribes are Morongo Band of Mission Indians and San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. That you want to connect and collaborate. Every tribe will have a council, elder members and leaders that hold knowledge. You want to invite them to the table. And I will say that humility and honesty will go a long way. You want to let go of traditional academic posturing and sort of a Euro-Western centric authority that you're, even though you're dealing with land that, is owned by your client or by you, your knowledge has to be secondary to the tribal knowledge and the language they may want to use in your land acknowledgement. We did not write our land acknowledgement. We worked with the tribes to come up with language, but in the end, their council approved it, rewrote it, did some, definitely wordsmithed, and came back to us, and we used that language because we were giving them that honor. Understand what the tribe expects and be prepared. In our case, this didn't happen, but prepared to offer fees if you're asking them to do work. If you're asking them to consult, certainly you want to make sure that they're being remunerated for their time if that's something that they're asking. So this is, we're a museum, so we like to do things in a creative way. So we didn't want to just do a bronze plaque. We wanted to do something that was really like a mini exhibit. And this is our land acknowledgement right as you walk in the front door. It welcomes visitors. So immediately upon entering, they understand, that we are on Serrano land. It was intentionally developed to create a main theme focused on restoration and renewal. This was unveiled in November of 2021. The placement in the entryway is a direct signal to tribal members and to the visitors that the museum and the land it occupies is a place for them and by them. It features 3 large panels. The largest central panel is in the Serrano language, the ancestral language that was nearly lost a generation ago because tribal children were actually forbidden by the public schools from speaking it. So I will tell you, when this was unveiled, that was a huge point of pride and emotion for tribal members that this was in Serrano on the wall. The other 2 panels translate the statement in English and Spanish. All the panels illustrate a background of a desert in bloom, symbolizing a renewed spirit after hundreds of years of complexity. And this is a close-up of it. Hang on one second. In the middle is, or you can see at the you see the Serrano in the middle, and then at the bottom, it's actually, we have a tribal youth, a young woman who actually spoke it. So it's a recorded version of it. And so visitors can come and listen to it spoken in Serrano. Again, this was a very, when this was first recorded and then presented at the unveiling, there was a lot of emotion about that. This is pretty unique as far as I can find in acknowledgements that it is actually spoken in the tribal language. The predominant placement of this in the exhibit allows guests to hear directly from the local community, and it's especially important part of the shared authority that I talked about within the museum space. So with that, I just want you to, I have a very short 1-minute video, and this is from the tribal members themselves, our partners, just 2 of them, who talk about that aspect of this land acknowledgement.
This museum is a place for all to discover and learn about this county's history, including the history of the Marañón people. This proclamation reveals to all that we are living people whose ancestors laid the foundation for this county many centuries ago. The recorded voice of one of our tribal citizens from our reservation will proclaim this fact for visitors now and into the future.
Our Serrano language, like our people, have struggled to survive. At times like this, we acknowledge that our elders went through to remain the Serrano people, to preserve their language and their culture. They fought to keep their identity in our world that tried to strip them of who they are. This proclamation, seen through the eyes of our youth, does the opposite. It affirms how critical their culture, language, and ancestral origins are to the identity of San Bernardino. As a parent here in San Bernardino, my heart is overjoyed to know that when my children visit this museum, they will be greeted and acknowledged in their own language.
So, I mean, that is a perfect example of, again, when I talked about the museum, really our mission is public engagement and impact. That was just amazing. So with that, I just wanted to leave you with some resources for further research, further reading, knowledge, some of the resources that we've used and that I find pretty useful, especially in California. Also, I did, as I mentioned, I spoke with our partners about this talk, and San Manuel Band of Mission Indians wanted to make sure that you have their contact name in case, because I'm assuming that many of you are on Serrano land. If you have any questions for them, Jessica Mock is always available to answer your questions. And then I also have at the very bottom my personal email and phone number. I'm retiring at the end of the month, and so feel free to reach out to me personally. I don't mind at all. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this.
Thank you so much, Melissa. This is very, very informative, and appreciate seeing this. Does anyone have any questions for Melissa? If anyone is thinking of doing something like this in their own city, or this would be a really good time to either, if you want to go off mute to ask, or put them in the chat. Well, I do have one question that might be in folks' minds and could be good to answer to. I know you mentioned about continuing communication with the tribe and partners. What has that looked like beyond the land acknowledgement? How does that continue moving forward?
So for us as the museum, we are working very closely with the tribe on exhibits. Specifically one we have that's in development right now up at Victor Valley Museum. We're working on, they are co-curating an exhibit with us on tribal culture. But in addition, we've had other instances in the museum exhibits, for instance, in our Hall of Biodiversity about the native plants and animals in our county. We've asked them for input on our exhibit story, because the museum tells stories. And so we're always, and we also have had an exhibit on, wildfires, and we wanted to get their story on, wildfire and the environment. And so we're constantly reaching out to them to ask them for their input. We're also working with them on some education programs for tribal youth to help familiarize them and train them in the collections that we hold. So there's just a variety. I mean, once you start working with many of you who work with partners, once you make that connection, you start to find so many various ways you can work together. And so they're always at the top of our mind when we're doing new initiatives, and they don't have to be necessarily specifically about Native culture.
Well, thank you so much for that. Are there any other questions? Miguel, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to take this opportunity, Melissa, to thank you for being here. I like to let you know how I met Melissa. I went to, it was an event held by Arts Connection of San Bernardino. That group is working on creating I think it's a cultural master plan for the Inland Empire. And she presented this information. And I was just really inspired by what you shared. And that's what prompted me to ask you to be part of this conversation. And the reason for that is because this organization, the Inland Empire section of APA, as directed by our director, Christine Saunders, one of our colleagues and myself were working on developing a land acknowledgement for our organization. In addition to that, through the California Planning Roundtable, we're also looking into developing one that fits or needs, if you will. But because these two organizations are, they're not bounded by just one small locality, it seems to me that the challenge is to encompass more and have a meaningful land acknowledgement. Is a little more difficult in APA California, which is the statewide organization of planners. Actually, last year released a toolkit on how to do land acknowledgements. And again, that's a good step, but I don't think there was enough involvement from planners or tribal members. So I think that your story is helping us see the importance of involving those who we are acknowledging. So I have one question once I provided this premise. What was the most difficult aspect that you encounter as you develop this document?
So, knowing this is being recorded, I think the most difficult, it wasn't difficult, but I think so the museum staff, we all work in the culture space. So this was a very natural process for us to go through. There was nothing that was unusual or foreign to us. But once we presented it to our county government, because the county board of supervisors had to approve us doing this, there were some questions that came up in the legal review. And I think that was the challenge of making it understood what this was about. And I'm glad you asked the question, because one of the things I didn't mention in my presentation was this is all, it is an exercise in building trust, period, full stop. I mean, this is an exercise in building trust, and I can't emphasize that enough. And that's why I kind of described it as a diplomacy protocol. It is, you have to trust your partners, and you have to be open to the idea of just an open heart and graciously acknowledging what's happened in the past. That's all this is. But there were questions about kind of intentions. What's the tribe's intention in this? And that's not part of what we were trying to do. I think once you go down that road of what's the intention, that's when you start to split off into extreme positions over, and this could, land acknowledgements. There's areas around the country where it's starting to become political. It doesn't need to be. This is all about just building trust. And it's something that is long overdue. And the county, to their credit, got over those questions pretty quickly and we were able to explain, and they understood what this was about. It's really about diplomacy. And I don't think it needs to, we don't need to read anything more into that. Honestly, if there's a trust issue, think about 150, 200 years ago when, we promised California tribes 7.5 million acres of land and then pulled the rug out. If the trust issue is there, it's probably on the other side. We need to be open enough to do this. And we need to be, again, humble enough to do this acknowledgement because it's the right thing to do and because it establishes that we want to be partners and we want to work together, just as we would, if the US was dealing with a foreign nation. We need to build that diplomacy and trust with our local partners. And as you know, the tribes do so much in our communities, so much. So I think that was the challenge, is just, and I imagine others will find challenges in just explaining to people that they report to or work with why this is important.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Melissa. I couldn't agree more with building trust. And it looks like we have one more hand up.
Yeah, I appreciate Miguel asking the question, my colleague from down the hall. But yeah, and then Melissa, thank you for your presentation and mentioning the whole issue of trust. You use a really operative word for me, and in that being diplomacy. And so when we think of diplomacy, we might think of like international type of framework, but just even thinking about how these are sovereign nations. So I really want to hold on to that word diplomacy, because we are working with sovereign entities most of the time. So I work with the county of Riverside, and so we are working on land acknowledgements. Can you kind of hone in on like that legal aspect and board of supervisors? I'm new to the county, but we've been given this nice project to work on. So it seems kind of daunting, and it's really encouraging to see what you all have been able to accomplish. But yeah, that we don't want to focus too much on challenges, but it is really instructive because county work is very bureaucratic most of the time. So that you were able to accomplish such beautiful work. How were you able to get through the BOSs and the board of supervisors, et cetera? Or did you how did you work your magic is my question.
So, well, so in our county, our legal team, the county council, looked at it and did not find any issues, but there were questions about, well, does this obligate us in some way? Is there some legal obligation? And I think that, I'll just say it out loud, that the fear was, well, if we acknowledge this, does that mean some future time they're gonna have some claim to land? That's the fear. And it's just, it's not in our legal framework. And our county council, they looked at it and there was no issue. There's no issue there, obviously. And I sort of touched on across the country, there's some pockets of, there are some tribes that are, or individuals that are affiliate with the tribe that have created a land back movement. But that's sort of okay. That's separate. Sure, it it derives from the same issues historically, but it's not a reason for us not to just do the right thing. And I think I mentioned, in building trust, if we don't just do the right thing and have open hearts and build this trust, things could across the country, again, I don't want to speak out of turn, but they could go in extreme directions because no one wants to just, can we just work together? So I just think it makes sense. It's the right thing. And there is no, so legally, from our county council, there's nothing in a land acknowledgement that ties or that ties the hands of the county later. So, technically, and I'm not an attorney. I'm just telling you what our county council told us is that this is not a legal document. This is not a contract or anything like that. It is simply an acknowledgement.
Thank you.
And I don't know if there's attorneys on this call, but that was the challenge. And that may be, because the government entities are, look at things in sometimes a very narrow, very risk averse way. So I get that we got the questions. I almost expected them to, because I knew they didn't know much about it. I almost expected that question.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna go ahead and move on to our next presentation. We're running a little short on time, but thank you so much for the questions and answering the presentation. So, but Christine, you had your hand up before we move on to David.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that there's, if anyone's been following the recent Supreme Court cases that are coming out, this is very much relevant to the case that was just decided. And I think it was released yesterday about this very topic, and it's very much relevant. So I would just encourage everyone to read that case and understand what the implications of it may be. And there was also a podcast called This Land that goes through the case. And so they've been awaiting this ruling that came down yesterday that's not in their favor. So there's our late breaking news as it relates to these issues. So just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention as well.
Thank you. And we do have a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and put it in there because it went direct message to me. And Melissa, if you would like to answer that in the chat, that would be awesome. So I'll put that in right now. So next we have David, who is the Assistant Planning Director at the City of Palm Springs. From what we know, he started in Palm Springs in 2005, and since then is the Assistant Planning Director, is going to lead us through giving us information about Section 14 in Palm Springs. And go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Melissa, for that very informative report on what you've been doing. It looks very exciting. So today I'm here to talk about Section 14 in Palm Springs. For those that don't know, Palm Springs is the westernmost city in the Coachella Valley. You can see here on the left side of the screen where we are located relative to the other cities here in the valley. Section 14 is a 1 square mile area that is bound by the downtown area to the west and Indian Canyon Drive. To the north is Alejo Road, and the east is Sunrise Way, and the south is Ramon Road. So you can see here on the right side of the screen where that is relative to our downtown and the airport further to the east. So in terms of the background of Section 14, following the Great Depression, Palm Springs was one of the few places where there was opportunity for low-skilled workers that could work in jobs that involve service industry for vacationers. And it resulted in really more people of color coming to the city in search of opportunity, given what everyone was experiencing after the Great Depression. One quote that we heard from a family member who moved here back in 1943 was, people in Texas thought of California as a dream state where you could go into your backyard and just pick dollar bills off the tree. So it was interesting because it was seen as an area of opportunity. And so many landed in Section 14 where rental opportunities were available from the tribe. There were, as many places saw, deed restrictions that prevented the purchase of land elsewhere for people of color. And it really was seen as, a close place to, a place where jobs were, a place where people could live that were close to jobs. So the proximity of Section 14 to downtown, the hotels, restaurants, things of that nature. So proximity wise, it made sense, and it was a location that was relatively affordable near downtown. So by the 1950s, there were a wide range of structures that ranged from tents and shacks to trailers, and some homes that were built in compliance with building codes. But there was a lack of utilities to these homes, and in many cases, families had to use communal showers and restroom facilities. And it really became kind of a community in this area as families would help other families kind of build places to live. You can see some of those things, so those in the pictures here on the right. And then in the 50s, we saw the displacement begin to occur. And just as a bit of background, the city is currently being litigated against this matter. So there's the information I'm presenting to you today is all found on our historic context statement that was adopted a few years ago, as well as some information that is available in staff reports and things like that on our website. So this is all kind of factual information for everyone's knowledge. But as I said, in the 50s is when displacement began. The Bureau of Indian Affairs approved a city abatement program, and eviction notices were served to residents of Section 14. Many displaced residents chose to voluntarily move. A lot moved west of Palm Springs to Banning, Beaumont, or other locations. Others moved outside of Section 14 within Palm Springs. Specifically, there's the Crosley Tract on the easterly edge of the city, the Desert Highlands Estates area and the Gateway Estates area, and the northerly areas of the city on just west of Indian Canyon Drive as you're headed out towards the freeway. And then there's the one that's not on here, it's the Veterans Tract and the Demuth Park area, which is also kind of easterly on the easterly portion of the city. So we did see, there were residents that moved out of the city, and there were some that just moved in other locations in the city. And so that happened through basically 1966. And there was an Attorney General investigation that happened between 1966 and 1968 as a result of a request from the Fair Employment Practices Commission that contacted the California Attorney General. And the report or the memo basically concluded that there was no evidence of any crimes committed with the removal of Section 14 residents from Section 14 and the destruction of their homes. But the report did find that the incident displayed a unique insensitivity on the part of the city of Palm Springs to the problem of adequate minority housing in particular, and to the minority community relations in general. So the report also describes that several other comments about what the city's actions were and how they were basically insensitive. So moving kind of closer towards today, the city of Palm Springs established the Human Rights Commission in 1992. That commission has a mission statement that says that they are to promote and protect the diversity of the community and to improve human relations through education and community awareness. And so the Commission reviewed the Attorney General report March of last year, and they adopted a resolution, formally adopted a resolution apologizing for the city's role in actions associated with the displacement of residents in Section 14. So it's, the Commission, did do the right thing here by acknowledging that there were certain actions of the city that were wrong, formally adopted the resolution. And then September of last year, our council held a joint meeting with the Human Rights Commission. And the council ultimately adopted a resolution also apologizing for the city's role and actions associated with Section 14. You can see here on the right one of the recitals from that resolution, where it says, "Be it resolved that we, the undersigned members of the Palm Springs City Council, recognize that Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other working class residents' homes and property were destroyed by the raising of Section 14 and regret the tremendous harm caused and mourn the loss of sense of community, loss of generational wealth, damage to community institutions, and ongoing exclusion caused by the demolition of this neighborhood." So as a part of this kind of overall conversation, the council took a look at kind of leadership at the time and directed staff to begin the legal process to remove the Mayor Bogert statue that's located in front of City Hall. And so Mayor Bogert was the mayor at the time when much of these actions were occurring. So that was another component that came out of kind of this discussion. And the council also directed staff to develop proposals on economic investment as reparations for the disruption of Section 14. So what does that look like? The city manager prepared a report to the council to consider various options. Kind of taking two looks at it, two different lenses at it, through either a settlement approach or an atonement approach. If it's a settlement approach, there's advantages to that. It's likely the most thorough way to establish a true nexus with the economic damages associated with Section 14 evictions. But the disadvantages of the settlement approach is it can be difficult to determine the methodology for calculating damages that can withstand scrutiny. And it's also really kind of hard to understand, what records exist and the details of those records to substantiate, who is a settlement should be paid to, how much it should be, and what format it could be. The other approach that kind of has been discussed is the atonement approach. It relies less on strict calculation of damages. It focuses more generally on making things right, acknowledging the past and doing things to create or reduce inequities that we see today. And it allows evaluation and adjustment over time to achieve greater social equity and the outcome of social equity. So the disadvantages of the atonement approach is that it diminishes the nexus with the economic damages associated with Section 14 evictions. They're more open-ended in nature with the atonement approach, and which may feel like less of a concrete commitment to the intended beneficiaries of reparations. So at this time, that's kind of the discussions that we've been having at the council level in terms of what does it look like. As I mentioned, the city has received a lawsuit on this issue. So there is, it seems as though that there is, they are seeking a settlement approach type of reparation. but that is still to be determined. So that's kind of where we are with Palm Springs and kind of what has happened in Section 14 in the past.
Thank you, David, for that history. Does anyone have any questions? I do have one question, and then we can go ahead and move into breakout rooms. I know we're slightly behind, but in the theme of leading ethically and also building trust with tribal nations, like apart from the litigation and reparations and all of that stuff, how is the city of Palm Springs rebuilding that trust with the tribe and the local community members, and particularly also Black, Indigenous people of color in Palm Springs?
Yeah, we're really fortunate in Palm Springs. We work pretty closely with the Agua Caliente Band of Kuya Indians. Their office is also in Palm Springs. We work closely with their planning department on many items, many issues, projects and other things that we have a pretty close relationship and have a lot of trust. So that thankfully we are fortunate when it comes to building the trust with our local tribe.
Well, thank you for the presentation. And I think we can go ahead and move into our breakout rooms if there aren't any more questions. So definitely look forward to seeing folks in the rooms. We have 2 more facilitators that will be helping us out. There's 4 of us. It'll be myself, Miguel, Shelly, and Andrea. And a little bit about Andrea and Shelly. Shelly is the co-chair for the APA Tribal and Indigenous Planning Group, and Andrea is the recently elected president-elect for the APA California and is now the Community Development Director for the City of West Sacramento. So if you can go ahead and put us into rooms, or if we have to get into breakout rooms, we have a few questions to just kind of talk about a few key takeaways from the presentations, what we've learned, and just how we can, just learn from each other also. So.
And Leslie, I'd like to add that we'll be in the breakout rooms until 12:20, and then we'll come back to the main room to hear impressions from Andrea and Shelly. And I think everyone can self-assign, right, Rob?
Yes, that's right. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms, and attendees will be able to select which room they'd like to go into. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to open our rooms. And you should have the option to just kind of trickle into the room that you'd like.
I'll be in room 4 facilitating.
You mean that we'll be in the rooms till 1:20, right?
1:20, yes. I don't know what I said.
You said 12, but that's all right, thank you.
So gradually people are just kind of trickling into their rooms right now. So. So if you're just joining us right now, currently we have breakout rooms open, and as attendees, you have the option to join. So we have room number 1 with Andrea, room number 2 with Shelly, room number 3 with Leslie, and then room number 4 with Miguel. If you need assistance, just let me know. You can just unmute yourself. and I'll be happy to help out with any questions you have.
How's everyone feeling? Good? Exhausted, tired? Is it hot where y'all are at? 'Cause it's hot here. I'm always complaining about the heat, but I've lived in the desert my whole life.
Oh, wow. Okay, Miguel, do you want Shelly and I to just start
Yeah,
chatting away?
yeah, if we want to hear from you and Shelly, if you can talk a little bit about your backgrounds, if you will, and then tell us about your reactions to, I don't know, you can bring it from the whole, universe down to or localities, and obviously the relationship to APA and planning. So go ahead.
Shelly, you want to start?
You should, Andrea, please.
Oh, well, okay. So hi, everyone. Andrea Ouse. I'm the president-elect of the California chapter of APA. For those of you that aren't members, it's the largest chapter in the nation with about 6,000 members. I am going to be taking on the presidential helm, I guess, in earnest on January 1st of next year. But I will say I'm also a California Planning Roundtable member, which is an affiliate of the APA. And that's where I've gotten to know Miguel. So I am currently the Community Development Director for the City of West Sacramento. But I think more importantly for me, I am a member of the Coast Miwok tribe. And the Coast Miwok tribe has, our ancestral home is in the northern Marin County area around Tomales Bay. My grandfather was born in Marshall. My great grandmother was Coast Miwok, and she lived in the town of Bodega. So I have deep roots in that area. I am very sensitive to the land acknowledgement discussion we're having today, because I think it's deep and it's very profound for me to raise, if doing nothing else, to raise the visibility of Indigenous peoples. I should say that our tribe lost federal recognition in the 1950s because they thought we were extinct. It was only until the year 2000 when we applied and were granted federal recognition once again. So I take tremendous pride in being a Coast Miwok, and I'm eager to hear more about folks that have worked on land acknowledgements. But in the meantime, I'm going to talk to my, I'd like to pass it off to my friend Shelly.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the honor of participating, and thanks, Miguel, for the invite. My name is Shelly Wade, and I live and work on the land of the Dena'ina. I am not a tribal Indigenous person, but I did grow up in Alaska. And as I was sharing with my good friends in group number 2, I spent the first part of my life growing up in the interior of Alaska, where I received essentially no education on the Alaska Native people of this state and the Indigenous population of this state. And I don't know if that was the ultimate driver or where things landed for me, but I walked into my first anthropology class, Native Peoples of Alaska, when I was 17 years old, and have continued that passion and interest. And that's all sort of culminated in this really amazing opportunity to work in partnership with my colleague and very good friend, Mr. Sherwin Racehorse, who is a Shoshone-Bannock tribal member and is my fellow partner and interim co-chair for the, get ready folks, let's celebrate, the new Tribal Indigenous Planning Division of the American Planning Association. It has been a journey, including a lot of the themes that I've heard, and I want to hear, Andrea too, what you were hearing from folks, but the themes of education and the need for education of non-tribal partners and the opportunity there, which is a very key part of the Tribal Indigenous Planning Division's strategic plan and our priorities that include opportunities like this. And so this is, my heart rate is up a little bit right now because it's just so exciting what's happened in today's dialogue. And I feel like we need like 3 days together, and you know, we need to do a retreat and all kinds of other things, but certainly the communications piece that we've also talked about, including that trust component. And Sherwin and I and our fellow kind of interim coordinator person for the Tribal Indigenous Planning Division, Ben Lubbers, who is married to a tribal member for the Tulalip tribes, but he's a planner for the Tulalip tribes. All of us together have been educating APA on the importance of the tribal Indigenous voice and integrating and prioritizing tribal Indigenous planning issues and people and places in everything that APA does. And certainly in sessions like this and the opportunity to deliver and really share like the practical. I heard some folks talk about like operationalizing this idea of a land acknowledgement. What does that really mean? So how do we take that concept and that really important action and put it into even more tangible, positive outcomes? And I think that's really the charge before all of us. So I was really excited, Melissa, to hear your presentation and to reflect on something that you said. And Andrea, I'm going to steal the show for just 2 more seconds here, and only because, and I have to do this, you guys, because I feel like it's really important to go right to the voice of a tribal member that I work with in Southwest Alaska. And this is from a kind of a conservation group and a cooperative that's been working together. These are her words. Sometimes there is disingenuous attempts at tribal input. We are asked for statements of support for a completed proposal without collaborating during design phase. And if you just apply that to anything you do as a planner or as an architect or whatever role that you have here today, if you consider that, and I think Scott from our group that we were meeting earlier talked about like that, those, you know, getting and having those communications happen consistent and earlier. And then I just wanted to talk about that, those capacity challenges of our tribal friends. And so where a tribal administrator, folks that don't think of themselves as planners are planners. They're doing this really amazing work for their tribal communities and partners, and for non-tribal partners. And so I wanted to think about that as folks are, and this ties into my last comment here, that the constant and consistent pressure on tribal Indigenous people and communities to respond to questions that non-tribal people have about their communities. And so including the collaboration on a land acknowledgement, which is a really wonderful and a positive thing, but it requires an energy and something that Manuel talked about in terms of just like viscerally how folks are impacted by what's happening in their communities and decisions that negatively impact tribal people, that to really think about that and consider that as you're engaging. And so this, in this case, this tribal member was talking about like, I just want to give all the non-tribal folks a DVD and say, okay, listen to this, watch this before you engage with our people, so that you have a baseline understanding of our people, where we come from, our history. And I also want to, last thing is very important, of using present tense when you're talking about stewards and land ownership and land acknowledgements, that those folks have not gone away. Those folks very much exist today. So with that, Andrea, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I think those are brilliant. And I know we're running up on time here, but I think those points are spot on, Shelly. And I think for me, the most important thing is to take off our colonial hats and put on our listening ears and really listen and engage, because that's what planners do. They really put it in the planomatic, they take the input and they make meaningful policies out of it. And clearly having an Indigenous voice or voices at the table and really in understanding where they're at is critical for us to operationalize and to make this part of the work that we do, whether it's policy work or other forms of engagement in the public sector and the private realm. So thank you, Shelly, for sharing all of that, because those are really critical quotes and ideas that I think we should be certainly sharing that more widely. And I look forward to working with you, Shelly, because I met you at the national conference, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your leadership make that new division thrive. So thank you. Miguel, should I hand it off to you then, or?
It just goes back to Leslie to close.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Shelly. Thank you, Andrea, for your remarks and this, wonderful presentation from all the panelists. Thank you everyone for being here. Also, we lost a few people after the breakout room, but it's okay. We're doing great already. And I think that's all we have for today. And I think we'll be sending a follow-up email with possibly some information, resources that folks might need. So, and once again, if folks have, other questions or comments or even ideas for how you want to continue bridging opportunities to learn from each other and, become better planners in this world, I think we can work with that. So.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.